Hello and welcome everybody to U.S. History 1877 to the present. I hope you are all having an excellent day. It's me, Professor Ferrero, and today we will be picking back up with the New Deal. Last class we talked about the New Deal and the overall political aspects of it, all of the programs behind it, FDR and his presidency, but today we're going to be doing a short, brief little lesson about the social consequences of the New Deal. How did the New Deal affect different groups here within United States? So, with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. So, the social impacts of the New Deal. The biggest group that it's going to affect the relation between labor and the government. Union membership is going to be up to 9 million by 1940. In the 1930s, labor unions are going to help provide a roadmap for the Great Depression, and after FDR's reelection in his first election in 34, there's going to be a huge spike in strikes. Ultimately, you see the creation of the creation of the Congress of Industrial Organization. Basically, this is going to go ahead and try to address the economic imbalances in the country. Ultimately, FDR is going to attribute the Great Depression, albeit somewhat misplaced, to the disparity between the wealthy and the poor. The CIO would also go ahead and advocate for black members and advocate for anti-lynching. So labor is really going to benefit quite a bit from the New Deal. The New Deal has disparate effects on different minorities. Native Americans probably get the best deal for minorities in terms of the New Deal. They get the passage of the Indian New Deal, aka the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. What this is going to do is it's going to repeal the Dawes Act that we talked about way back in the Westward Expansion lecture and the Gilded Age. The Dawes Act was basically forced assimilating Native Americans. The Indian New Deal is going to go ahead and it's going to get rid of that. And on top of that, it's going to make a fund for Native Americans to start buying their land back from the descendants of whites and others who may have taken their land. Next is going to be Filipino Americans. I say Filipino Americans because there's not really many Asian Americans in the United States at this point. Immigration had been so restricted. The only immigrants that are really getting allowed in from Asia are the Philippines, because if you think back to our American Empire video, the Philippines is an American colony at this point. So those who were born in the Philippines, the U.S. is going to grant them the ability to travel back to the Philippines fully paid for. Most Filipino Americans, though, see this for what it is. It's meant to get them out of the way, and they're worried that if they leave and head back to the Philippines, they're not going to be allowed back into the United States. And more than likely, they would have been correct about that. They would not have been allowed back into the United States. The goal is to get as many people out of the way just so they can create enough jobs. And finally, Mexican Americans. We talked about it during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression lecture, but the Depression is going to hit Mexican Americans particularly hard, in large part because of the Dust Bowl. A lot of Hispanics are going to get displaced. They're going to get pushed out because of the Dust Bowl. So go ahead and see, that says lecture 6.2, but I believe it's going to be lecture 6.3 if I'm not mistaken. So lecture 6.3 talks about the Dust Bowl, and yeah, the white farmers from the center of the country, they're going to move to California because their farms are all in ruins. They start going into conflict with migrant workers for jobs, and ultimately it's going to lead to the deportation not just of Mexican migrants, but of Mexican Americans, of American citizens. They're going to get sent to Mexico, many of which never had ever even been there. So our final ethnic group is going to be the New Deal and African Americans. In terms of the New Deal, the African American community benefits way more in the North than they do in the South. In the North, they're going to get job training, they're going to get education, literacy rates are going to go up under the New Deal for African Americans in the North. In the South, Not so much. FDR is a Democrat. While he's a Northern Democrat, he relies on the support of Southern Democrats in Congress. Southern Democrats in Congress are not going to want to expand New Deal benefits to African Americans in the South. FDR does appoint several African Americans to key roles in the federal government. That's not to say that federal hiring practices were not still discriminatory. That being said, the New Deal and the FDR administration is when we start to see the black population in the United States start to shift Democrat. Historically, they had voted Republican because the Republican Party was originally the party of anti-slavery. It's the party of Abraham Lincoln. It's the party who goes ahead and is going to pass the Reconstruction Amendments. But you start seeing them shift here more towards Democrats, in large part due to the fact that Democrats are offering a lot of social services to poor individuals. And African Americans, by the data at the time, and even today as of 2025, tend to be poorer on average. Many African Americans are going to look at the New Deal and label it as a raw deal because, again, especially in the South, it doesn't really do much to help them. While you do start to see African Americans shift more Democrat here in the 30s, it's really not going to be until the 1960s under LBJ and the Great Society that you see black Americans voting en masse for the Democrats. And that's true of the programs as well. The programs aren't going to be fully sent out to African Americans really until the Great Society. And that's going to leave us with this final little bit here. There's a redefinition of freedom for many. FDR is going to argue that the common man embodies the heart and soul of our country. The American way of life is going to shift a bit more to unionism, to social citizenship, and not to being excessively wealthy. The Popular Front, a labor group, they're going to give, I think, a pretty honest opinion on U.S. history. They're going to say, hey, America is pretty great. It's heroic, it's done many great things, but at the end of the day, it's also done a lot of terrible things too. And those things deserve and need to be acknowledged just as much as the great things that America has done. You do start seeing more protection for civil liberties and labor unions. This is going to go on to shape the civil rights movement. I would argue really the 1930s and 40s are really going to pave the way for the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s. The U.S. is also going to establish HUAC, which is going to matter a lot more later. When we get to the beginning of the Cold War, the House of Un-American Activities Committee is going to start to respond to disloyal Americans. Who's a disloyal American? Whoever HUAC decides. By 1938, the New Deal is kind of going to fizzle out. As we talked about last class, neither the first nor the second New Deal really bring the change to get the United States out of the Great Depression. And because of that, people are kind of fed up with it. And because of that, it's going to go ahead and kind of go out with a whimper. The long-lasting legacy of the New Deal, though, is going to be one of changing the relationship between the government and the people. It's going to redefine the size, the shape, and the scope of government with all of its programs. Many of its programs we still see today, such as the FDIC, the SEC, and the Social Security Act. It reshapes the relationship between the United States government and its people, for better and for worse. With all of that being said, we have to now start to look internationally because the Great Depression has more repercussions than just what's going on here in the United States. It also is deeply going to affect Germany. And this is going to lead us into our next lesson on the start of World War II. If you have any questions, per usual, go ahead, write them down, bring them to next time you're in class with me. If you don't have me as a teacher, please feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments. I will go ahead and do my best to answer each and every single one of them. Be sure to leave a like and have a wonderful and blessed day. Take care, and Professor Ferrero out.